Hello everyone. My name is Yanni from Eagle MMS, and today I'm going to be doing an inflation and margins analysis of materials in the collision industry, and of course, what can be done about the declining margin. So first off, really two main issues here. We have rising costs, which I don't think anyone's a stranger to, and then we have a rate pay model that we've been using as a reimbursement mechanism for decades, which is basically your database generated refinish hours multiplied by some market rate, whatever that market rate happens to be, to get some type of materials estimate on what costs may be. So I kind of wanted to look at these two in correlation to one another over the last 24 years, basically from the early 2000s to modern day. And in order to do that, I had to pick a commodity to track the price of for like a CPI analysis. Now, when the Fed does this, they'll use a dozen eggs and a gallon of gas and a pound of ground beef, whatever. For the collision industry, I'm going to use a gallon of clear coat because it's something that everybody has, something that everyone uses on virtually every repair. Different repairs require different operations, procedures, and materials, but pretty much clear coat is something you're going to use on just about every single vehicle. So I figured it was a good commodity to track the pricing dynamic of. So I have list price sheets from various manufacturers here that I won't name, dating back to the early 2000s to modern day. So basically in 2001, you could get a gallon of name brand clear coat at list price for under $100. And then in 2011, obviously we see some increases. It's in the mid 200s, 200 and change. And then modern day, we're seeing a gallon of clear coat at list basically top $600, so over 600 bucks. And during that same time frame, we have the rate. So in the early 2000s, we have a rate of $17 per hour. In 2011, we have $28 per hour. And in 2023, so just last year, we have $40 per hour. And this is pretty much nationally where the rate has remained. It's in the low 40s. I think the national average is 46. And you have to take states like California and Rhode Island, other states that have a high rate into account. But that's the growth of the rate during the exact same time period. So to kind of understand what's going on here, I figured, why don't we plot the two of those together? Now, I don't have data for every single year, but I do have enough data over enough years that I can sort of start to paint a trend line. So I've plotted the P&M rate throughout the years from the teens to the 40s. I've plotted clear coat from the sub 100s all the way up to over 600. And then I plotted the two of them together. Now, you can see the two of these have vastly different slopes. That's the incline of the line. But I wouldn't expect the P&M rate to climb at the same rate as pricing. But I would expect there to be some type of reasonable relationship between the two. So when you actually plot one against the other, when you plot the refinish hour as a function of clear coat price, you actually see here in this bottom graph that the refinish hour is losing its buying power over the gallon of clear coat. It has an inverse correlation where as you go down the years, you have to have more P&M refinish hours to buy the same gallon of clear, basically, and a lot of times the exact same part number. So back in the early 2000s, roughly 3 refinish hours would buy you a gallon of clear at list. To buy that same gallon of clear at list, here in 2024, you have to have well over 10 refinish hours, which means the P&M refinish hours has had a 300% degradation in its ability to buy list price name brand clear. And you'll see actually a very similar graph to this with pretty much any commodity that you plot over the years, whether it's a box of sandpaper, whether it's filler, whether it's primer, whether it's base. Base is even more complicated because base coats, depending on what the paint code is, will have a different price category. And I've actually got some sheets here to show you. Colors without a price code, so this is a price code A or a base price, back in 2011 were $64 a pint. That same price without a code is $200 today. So you see that increase just in the last, a threefold increase just in the last, not even 24 years, it's 13 years. And then you see the variance between colors. So depending on what color a car is, you could have a Z code where it's $440 a pint, and then you could have anything in between. Now, all of the paint codes out there are distributed into different price categories, and that number also differs per paint manufacturer. So just depending on what paint line you are to spray a vehicle, you could have a different price per pint. And then if you have tri-coats and quad coats, you have multiple pints you have to spray because you have multiple layers, which drives up the let's call it the base layers cost substantially. Of course, none of this is accommodated for in rate pay, but I just want to talk a little bit about why we're seeing these price increases on one side, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the rate. So this is kind of the graphic I've put together to describe this as best as I can. A lot of the increased pricing doesn't really come from a change in value of the commodity, whether it's a barrel of petrol or a gallon of clear. It actually comes from the Federal Reserve printing money. And what happens when the Fed prints money, or as they call it, quantitative easing, is you inflate the money supply, the commodity remains unchanged in value, you now have to spend more of a debased currency to buy the same thing. So that's really the primary driver for increased costs. It's not increased value or increased scarcity or even increased demand, for as far as I could tell. This industry has contracted 2% in the last 2 years with shops shutting down left and right. So it's not increased demand or increased scarcity. It's debased value of currency, but a maintained value of the commodity. So what that does to the supply chain, if you go down the supply chain, is it makes it more expensive for the mining operation to dig raw resources out of the ground, petrol, minerals, all the stuff that we ultimately use every day. And they pass on the cost of those increased inputs to the factory in the form of increased price on their resources. The factory or the paint company, the 3Ms of the world, Norton, Saint-Gobain, Mirka, Sem, whoever it is, whoever has to manufacture the product now has an increased input cost associated with doing business. So they hike their list prices on your jobber. And then your jobber has to, in turn, pass on those costs to you. Now, for the first point in this distribution chain, we have to deal with an insurance bill payer, like a third-party bill payer, who may not necessarily want to pay the full claim or at the very least wants to mitigate the cost of claims, but they're also in some proportion seeing rising claims costs, and they're passing on that cost to the end consumer who pays it in the form of increased policies, regardless of whether or not they have a hit on their record. And to kind of tie this all together, I have the M1 money supply graph going up to like Q2 of 2023, and you can see that the money supply just shoots right up to the moon. Now, these inflationary effects are going to be distributed over the next couple of years, and that's if we stop printing money, which I can assure you as a country we have not. We're continually running the press. The Fed is buying, government bonds and treasuries to fund the debt and the politics, and the consumer feels the end result of that. This is not a political discussion, by the way. Every administration has done it. And this is old as time. I mean, Rome used to put bronze in the gold coins and cut down the coin size. So inflation is very much a human dynamic. It's been around for thousands of years. So this is what is essentially happening in terms of rising price. Your jobber did not wake up one day and decide, hey, I'm going to hike the price on this guy because why not? What's he going to do about it? So that's how you get clear coat topping $600 a gallon. Now, on the other end, you have the rate pay model, which is, database generated refinish hours multiplied by some rate. And we've noticed how that rate has done over the years and how it's lost its buying power over, a basic commodity like clear coat. But it was never really accurate to begin with. I know it's a controversial statement because we've been doing this for decades, but it was actually never an accurate reimbursement model. And there's a couple reasons why. True material costs don't exactly scale with refinish hours, truth be told. And to kind of illustrate that, I have two vehicles down here. One, let's say, has a scratch down the side, and the other, let's say, is hit heavily down the side. Now, presuming it's the same year, make, model with the exact same paint code, in those two scenarios, you're going to use different amounts of abrasive, different amounts of filler, different amounts of glaze, different amounts of primer, different amounts of sealer, different amounts of base. The only thing that's going to remain the same is full clear for panel coverage. But when you select those panels in the estimating platform, you're going to get the same database refinish values, you're going to get the same rates, and you're going to get it multiplied together to get the same materials costs, even though objectively those two jobs have different materials costs associated with them because of things that occurred in the body and structural phases of repair. That's not accommodated for accurately. Additionally, there's no variance for OE requirements and complexity, right? Different chassis have different construction, different manufacturers have different requirements for how to repair their vehicles. Just for example, I find the German makes are a little heavier on the adhesives and sealants. But if you have an American make like Chrysler, they load a bunch of foam into the rockers and into the quarters for sound deadening purposes. Tesla wants you to use a bunch of impact adhesive instead of regular panel bond adhesive. Different OEs have different part numbers and constructions, but the rate does not change based on the OE, of course. Then you have the variance in paint codes, which, as I mentioned before, if you look back at that suffix category page, you'll see that a paint code could fit into one of 6 or 7 paint categories, and they might have a price variance of 4 to 5x, just depending on what the color code is. But obviously the rate is not changing anywhere near that much in proportion based on the color code. And that's further complicated by the fact that those prices change depending on what product you happen to be spraying. And then there's no variance for part numbers. You could buy the most expensive product in the world. You could buy the cheapest product in the world. Ultimately, your reimbursement rate is governed by what zip code you're in, which really makes no sense. You know, it's funny. I have clients in Massachusetts that are stuck in the high 20s for the P&M rate. And I have clients in California who are in the 50s and low 60s. And they use exactly the same stuff. And I know that because I've done both of their inventories. They're on one of the major 5 name brand paint companies, you know, a mixture of 3M and Saint-Gobain, a mixture of SEM and Mirka, some other brands. But there's, 100,000 part numbers out there. About 90% of the industry is buying the same, I'm going to say 5 or 10,000 part numbers. And so most of the industry is pretty homogenous in what products they're buying and using. But they're not homogenous in terms of their reimbursement rate and then where they just happen to unfortunately be located, like my customers in Massachusetts. To further complicate that, there's no proper model for ancillaries. Now, we've seen the addition of more and more, clever line items at the bottom of estimates: seam sealer, bonding, kits, panel bond, impact glue, sound deadening, stuff like that. But more often than not, when you're looking at those estimates, they typically have a flat dollar amount value associated with them, as if somehow, seam sealer is $30. Well, what seam sealer are we talking about? Are we talking about a 1K? Are we talking about a 2K? Did you use a quarter tube, a half tube, a full tube? Did you use 2 full tubes? What vehicle are you working on? What are the OE requirements? There's no way you could talk about seam sealer and just say, yeah, that's $30. It is what it is. You can do an adjusted body rate, so you could attach a body materials rate to your body hours in your estimating platforms, and certainly if you're doing nothing else, you should absolutely do that. But then you have the issue of intensive and non-intensive body hours. If I'm R&Ing a door handle, for example, I'm not using any materials at all whatsoever, 0. But if I'm sectioning on a B-pillar, I'm using quite a large density of materials per body hour for those ops. So it's just as inaccurate as it is for refinish hours, or would be. And to kind of tie this home, would this even work for other physical goods? Well, imagine if you had a parts rate associated on your estimate instead of just billing the parts at list, or what they retail or what you buy them for. So let's say I had a 20-hour body job and I have a parts rate of $100 per parts hour and or per body hour, and I multiplied those two together. Well, I have $2,000 for parts, and that's it. It doesn't matter if it's a Ford or a Jaguar, if I'm doing a bumper, or maybe I need an HID headlight with a dynamic beam on it. That would be ridiculous, and my contention is that's exactly how ridiculous this all is. And I'm not having this conversation to advocate for higher rates, believe it or not, although I do believe the rate should be higher at the very least. I actually think rate pay as a whole is inaccurate, and I would like to talk about what can be done about it. So if we can't do the P&M rate anymore, if it's not an accurate model, what do you do about it? Well, I'd like to show you. You can join us at eaglemms.com, and to learn more, hit Attend Webinar in the bottom right. Put in your email, first name, last name, and phone number, and join us for one of our weekly Tuesday calls at 11 o'clock Eastern, where we go over the entire app top to bottom, as well as answer any insurance-related questions. Eagle MMS allows you to bill any part number by any manufacturer in an itemized fashion. That means body materials, paint materials, clips and fasteners by any variety of manufacturers. It's a totally agnostic system, And we're even integrated with all the major manufacturer paint mixing systems as well, so you could receive your live pours. We go over all that and more at Tuesday at 11 o'clock every single week. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you.